and welcome to my last episode of Vampire Recent Reads, or whatever I'm calling this series, for 2024. If you've not met me before, I'm Effie, and I'm pretty vampire obsessed. So in this video, I'm going to be rounding up the final vampire books that I read this year, talking a wee bit about them and just you know what happens on these kind of videos. You talk about books, you say if they're good, you say if they're bad, etc, etc. I hope you've been enjoying this series. I foresee it continuing into next year and beyond because I don't think I'm ever gonna not be obsessed with vampires. So we're gonna start off with a couple of books that aren't like technically vampire books, but are adjacent enough. So first off, we have His Mate by Resistance by Mel Aitchis, and the reason I've included this book is because we see a vampire from His Mate by Vengeance, the first book in this series, pop up in this book, and like he was just a character I just fell in love with. So I was so excited to see him pop up again in this book and hopefully further on in this series. So His Mate by Resistance is the second book in the Lunetti Pack series, and this follows a pack of wolves in a city where three different groups of supernaturals control the crime. So the werewolves control the guns, the vampires control the human trafficking, and the witches control the drugs. In this story, we are following a werewolf who has had multiple attempts on his life. So the pack decides to team up with a witch who is not officially part of the rest of the witches and owns a club and says, can you basically protect this wolf for us? And then the witch and the wolf end up slowly falling for one another. And I really, really enjoy the Lunetti Pack series. And as I say, we get to see Vin, who is the vampire we met in His Mate by Vengeance in this book. And he is just as delightful here as he was in book one. And then the second book that isn't technically a vampire book, but like kinda, is Rogue Community College by David R. Slayton. This is the first book in a companion series to the Adam Binder series, which follows a young man who ends up sucked into this world of magic. It's kind of vaguely tarot based, but it's just so delightfully intricate and engaging. So in this book, we are following a character who is something called a phage. And what that means is that by having a bit of someone else's blood, he can take on their powers. So he doesn't drink blood like a vampire, but, it's fairly, like, he does drink blood, but he doesn't drink it for sustenance. And I just really enjoyed being back in this world, and you get to see characters that you first saw in the world of Adam Binder, but it is a series that you can just jump straight into with this book because it's very much a case of you're getting cameos from characters. Well, apart from Vran, who appeared in book 3 of the Adam Binder series, but, Vran's very much main character. He's not the phage. He is, I think I want to say he's an elf, like a sea elf maybe. But it's a romance between Vran and this phage character, but it's very slow and it builds in a beautiful way. But that's not the primary point of this story. The point of this story is that this phage has been sent to this community college to try and kill the community college, and then he ends up realizing that he's kind of found a family along the way and maybe he doesn't want to carry out his original mission. And then onto vampire books, like actual vampire books. So we've got Ruby and the V-Day Vampires. That one always trips me up, by Vera Valentine and JG Logos. I think it's JG. I always forget if it's JG or JL. So this is essentially a short story, and it's following a character called Ruby, who is middle-aged, and I believe she's divorced, and she's basically spending her Valentine's Day geocaching, and then she ends up accidentally being shot with an arrow by one of these vampires. and it just ends up being smutty. Like, they end up having to have sex with her to counteract the poison of the arrow, and she ends up finding out that these are kind of exactly what she was needing in her life. As I say, it's very smutty. It's like, that's kind of the point. But there's also some real like emotional heart to the story. And I liked that these vampires don't shy away from the monstrous side of their vampirism. Like, they are fully like monstrous and not just like, oh, we sparkle in the sun kind of vampires, which, you know, there's a lot of flaws to Twilight, but there's nothing inherently wrong with the sparkling in the sun aspect of Twilight. Keep It in the Dark by Justin Richards is a YA vampire hunter book, and the basic premise of it is this vampire prince is sent to this kind of elite boarding school in order to prove that he is ready to embark on diplomatic missions on his own, and that he is not just gonna like bite humans. And he ends up having to room with the headmaster's son, who is quite spoiled, and they kind of immediately don't like each other, but there's also an immediate attraction there. And it makes for a really delightful dynamic as they slowly warm up to each other. There's also an element of the headmaster's son coming to realize his sexuality. And what I really liked about this book was that, like, some readers will find it a little bit too on the nose, but I really enjoyed the way that vampirism was very clearly analogous to queerness, and the way that people weaponize faith and beliefs and just generally like hatred, and are like, oh, I love you, but I don't love this aspect of you, as if you can love someone and not love the whole of them, as if you can put conditions on your love. And I just thought it really beautifully encapsulated all of that. It is quite possibly one of the best vampire books I've read this year. In the new year, I am planning on doing a ranking of all of the vampire books that I've read in 2024, and like, is it going to be top? I don't know, but I think it's probably going to be in the top 5. It was exceptional and very much lived up to my excitement that I had about this book. It was everything that I would want this book to be, and the messaging was gorgeous. These characters worked so well together. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. At the other end of the spectrum, we have The Last Raven by Helen Glynn Jones. So we've got this human woman who, on turning 18, she's meant to ascend into the role of the Raven, who is essentially like the monarch of the area that these vampires live in, except she is human and everyone around her is vampires, and humans are generally just seen as chattel. So a lot of this story is kind of focusing on the fact that she is kind of an outsider, and like, she lives in this in-between where she is a human but she's almost treated like a vampire, but she needs a bodyguard because she is still human, and like, some vampires don't respect her. And like, it's meant to be this romance between her and the bodyguard, but like, it didn't work in that aspect, because it kind of went from 0 to 100 to the point where I went, well, have I missed something? How have they gone from like hating each other to this? Did not even slightly work in that aspect. But what really didn't work for me about this book was the way that she fetishized like the lives of the humans. Like, she was so spoiled that she couldn't understand why, like, her desiring to be chattel was so wrong, and it was just deeply uncomfortable to read. Like, don't get me wrong, I understand the whole, like, spoilt princess trope, but it felt like it went beyond that. It was like, oh, I've got all this privilege, but I just want to be chattel, and it irritated me so much. And then the ending, you could see a mile off, and then it's clearly the start of a series, and it, there was this tiny little bit of interestedness right at the end, but I was like, I'm not putting myself through any more of these books because they're absolutely appallingly terrible. Oh, I just hated it so much. And then back to a good title, we've got By the Pint by Gemma Croft. And this is following a sunshiny vampire and a grumpy human who wants to be a vampire. So the law in this world is basically that whenever a vampire is turned from a human, they lose all of their memories before the point that they were turned. So throughout this book, you've got this impending threat. Well, threat's probably not the right word, conflict between these two characters that are slowly falling more and more in love with one another. But they know that if this human continues down this road to becoming a vampire, all of it will be lost because he'll lose all of his memories from being a human. So this vampire will just completely be erased from his memory. And it's heartbreaking. It makes it really tense, and you can see how conflicted these characters are. Like, the vampires being like, I want to love him, but I also don't want to take something away from him that means so much to him. And then the human characters kind of going, I'm really falling for him, but I've wanted this for as long as I can remember. Can I really give up this in order to be with him? And then, like, he's gonna live forever, and I've got maybe like 70 years, if I've got a good run, left in me. And alongside that, you've got this really stupid, but in a good way stupid, British humour. So this book is full of like tense romantic moments, and then it'll just come out with something silly like vambulances, or like, I think they're talking about like wanting to be in the middle of two very attractive vampires, and they're like, vampwitch. And it just, like, it just worked beautifully well together, all of these different aspects. And I think part of what worked for me was that I wasn't necessarily expecting it to be as good as it was. So when it came along and just swept me off my feet, I was like, oh, wow. And then we've got another absolutely terrible one. We have All I Want for Xmas is a Vampire by Amity Gray. So, as you may be able to tell from the title, I read this as part of a video where I was reading Christmas books. And I really, really despise this book so very much. So I thought, oh, Christmas book involving vampires. Great, perfect, very much my thing. And then the cover, it looks cozy, it looks fluffy. It looks like something along the lines of like, my roommate is a vampire, or vampires never say die. But, and I will give it its credit, it does say this in an author's note before it starts. This is supposedly a dark romance. Now, I don't agree with that. I don't think it's a dark romance. Like, I don't think I'm necessarily the person to define what makes something specifically a dark romance, but I think there was a certain something missing from this that would make me go, yeah, this is clearly a dark romance. I think part of the problem was that for a large portion of this book, it was very much like trying to tell you this vampire was like a bad guy. He wasn't like a cute, friendly sort of vampire. He did bad things. He wasn't ashamed to do bad things, etc., etc. But all you saw was what was, in my opinion, a pretty poorly written romance that was kind of like cute, and they were very gone for each other. And, you know, the pacing didn't quite work as well. The timing didn't feel like it matched up with what we were being told timing wise. But then you'd have moments where like these characters would like usually be like really cozy and cute, and then he'd do something and like he'd immediately be very forceful with her in a way that wasn't like cute at all. So I'll give you an example. So he goes away on a business trip or some nonsense like that, and he comes back and she's gone out with a co-worker, and the co-worker's got a bit handsy with her, and like in her drunken state I think like she kissed him, but like that was where she wanted it to stop, and he was being handsy and quite forceful with her. And like this vampire comes back, sees this happening, and immediately like kills the guy. And well, like he drags him into an alley and like kills and incinerates him and stuff. But he then like his inner monologue is like, how dare she do this to me? How dare she do this to me? And then he'll flip for a second and be like, oh, but she's drunk, so he's taking advantage. And then he'll be like, how dare she do this to me? I must get her back. And like he immediately like goes into her flat and like is forceful, like forces himself on her, and is like, I need to get revenge and stuff. So before that he asks her if she's drunk. Like, considering that he's literally just been thinking about the fact that this guy like getting handsy with her was taking advantage of the fact that she's drunk. So it's almost like he thinks that if he asks the question and she says, oh no, I'm not drunk, as if like in the 5 minutes that have passed she's suddenly no longer drunk. Like, that's not how it works. Like, the hypocrisy there. So yeah, he's being really forceful with her, and like it's very clear that she doesn't want this, but like the book's trying to be like, oh no, she does want it secretly, even though like she's weeping and being like, stop. No. And then it gets worse. Basically, like further on in the book, the character ends up, the FMC ends up being P&V essayed, and there's also issues around memory loss and stuff. But like it kind of glosses over that, and it just didn't work on so many levels, and I had such a bad time with it. And I will tell you now, this is the worst book that I've read this year, and that is saying something considering some of the books I started the year with. So thoroughly do not recommend this. This was a terrible book. And if anyone does know a good Christmas vampire book, please recommend them, because this can't be the Christmas vampire book. I need a redemption from this, because no, please, no. And then to end on a positive note, we have Lightfall by Ed Crocker. And this actually was the last new book that I read in 2024. So like it literally did end my reading. Like I read constantly and stuff, but I'm onto rereads now. So Lightfall is a book where there's no humans, and I love that. So we've got vampires, werewolves and sorcerers, and from my understanding they are all immortals, and for a while they kind of all lived together. They had this almost like utopian society, and things like class were kind of being done away with. And then 100 years ago, these mysterious beings known only as Greys came into the city. There was a massive massacre, and kind of everyone had to flee. And now we're following the vampires in First Light, and the story really opens with the First Lord, so essentially like the ruler of First Light, being his youngest son, who is said to have been very like compassionate towards those of lower classes. He associated with them. He wasn't really like, whilst he was technically nobility, he didn't really act and associate with the nobility so much. And he has just been assassinated by one of the Greys. And the story largely revolves around trying to get to the bottom of this murder. And it's fantastic. Like, Ed Crocker has clearly put so much thought into this book. He's put a lot of thought into the dynamics of the world, how it would work without humanity. Because if you think about, for example, like vampires, you know, you do often have like born versus made, and it's quite clear that these are born vampires versus made vampires. But that's one thing you've got to think about. And then also, usually vampires drink blood, so where's their blood source? And it turns out that in this world, their blood source is various animals, although the best of the best blood that they can drink is what's called wolf kind, and it is literally werewolf blood. But how do they get this werewolf blood? Well, they get it from this source. And then because there's like different animal bloods, there's then this idea about, well, the lower classes drink this kind of blood and it's not, like, it doesn't give them much beyond sustenance. And then the middle classes drink these kind of bloods. And then the nobility have access to this kind of blood. And it's just so well thought through. And then in addition to that, we have the driest of dry British humour, which I absolutely loved, and it made me chuckle at the stupidest points. Like, I don't mean actually at the stupidest points, but like, I'd just be reading and then suddenly this dry humour would be coming out and then just get a little chuckle from it. I also thought it was incredibly tender and thoughtful in places. There's a lot of time been spent on lore, and you have like extracts from like historical documents and songs and stuff that really adds to the whole overall experience. And then these characters were just fantastic. I loved each and every one of them. Like, I cannot sing the praises of this book loudly enough. Like, this was such a good book, and I'm so grateful to Crocker for being kind enough to send me across an arc, because there's no words for just how good this book was and how good it was to finish my reading for the year with this book and to finish this video with this book. So I just want to say, if you don't watch any of my other videos, because maybe you're just here for my vampire videos, thank you very much for being with me this year, and thank you for watching this video. As always, if you have any recommendations for vampire books, including self-racks, I don't mind, feel free to leave them. Please leave them in the comments. And until next time, love you. Bye.